start in chapter 23, verse 13 today. So last week we left David and his, mighty men delivering the people there in the city, or the town of Keilah, and Saul coming down to capture him because he was there, because the city was one that was fortified and able to kind of surround him in there. David heard of this, learned of this attack. The citizens that were there were going to give him up to Saul too, because they were afraid that Saul was going to kill them. And eventually he flees and leaves the walled city there in Keilah. And what we're going to see is that he is now moving to the desert of Ziph. And the desert of Ziph is about 45 miles from Keilah, and it would be like south central Judah area is where they are at. And while they are there, every day Saul and his men are out trying to find where David is at, trying to capture him. The search for them becomes fruitless. They can't find the encampment, and as we'll see here, starting in verse number 13, Jonathan is able to find David and comes and kind of has a conversation with him while he is running around here. All right, so let's start there in 1 Samuel chapter 23, starting in verse 13. We'll see thee up there camping in the desert. Then David and his men, which were about 600. How many did David have last time we... So he's got some more people have showed up, right? 200 more guys have showed up. So we've got about 600 men now. Arose and departed out of Keilah and went whithersoever they could, and was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah. He forbare to go forth. And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds, and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hands. And David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David into the wood, and strengthened his hand in God. And he said unto him, Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee. And that also Saul my father knoweth. And they two made a covenant before the Lord. And David abode in the wood, and Jonathan went to his house. So Jonathan finds David. Providentially, right? God probably led Jonathan to where he was at, or this may have been a place that Jonathan and David probably spent some time in that nobody else knew about, right? We don't know. It might have been a secret location that when they were growing up they went to. Jonathan probably had an idea David was there. But you could think at this point, hiding 600 people in the wilderness, in the desert, like that's a pretty big task, right? You think if the 15 of us went out somewhere and tried to hide, and somebody was looking for us and knew kind of the general area we were at, it probably wouldn't take them very long to find us, unless we were real good hiders. 600 people is a lot. That's a lot of people there. That's pretty much taking every kid at Ridgeview High School and the staff, pretty much all of us, and send them into the woods somewhere and trying to hide them. That's what this is like. So this has been a difficult thing, but either Saul's men weren't looking real hard, or God just obviously providentially stepped in here to make it where it was hard for them to find him. But Jonathan does, and Jonathan finds David and locates him, and we can see here, verse 16, that this was probably something that David really needed. Right, David's probably getting pretty discouraged at this point. I know he's wore out. He's running around taking care of all these people, making sure they're fed and food, something to drink, place to stay, shelter for the most part, right? And these 600 people are looking to him as their leader. So David's probably physically wearing down. That emotionally and spiritually he's probably lacking a little bit, right? He has to be. The guy that God wants to be king, but the guy that he's king is trying to kill him. So Jonathan finds him and has this conversation with him, and as we see in verse 16, strengthened his hand in God. He assures David, right, in verses 16 and 17 there, that he was in fact going to be the king over all of Israel, which would have been a big deal, right? Jonathan, again, we've mentioned this a bunch of times, Jonathan was technically the guy in the line to be the king, but now we've got that guy once again telling David, hey, I know you're God's man for this job. And we see them renewing their covenant of friendship. And at this point, Jonathan leaves. And unfortunately, as we know how this story goes, this is the last time Jonathan and David see each other. So this would have been an encouragement to David. Pretty big of Jonathan to go and do this, right? This was kind of shows Jonathan's character as well. We know obviously God directed him to do this to encourage David. And we can probably think in our own lives, right, when God has used somebody, a person, to encourage us to stay true to him while things were difficult, right? I'm sure you can all think of somebody who maybe just out of the blue, right, come in and said something that was encouraging or just did something that you didn't really even know why they did it, but it was helpful and very uplifting to you while you're going through some kind of difficult time. This is what Jonathan did for David. Showed up out of nowhere and gave him some encouragement. Let's jump down to verse 25. Saul also and his men went to seek him, and they told David, wherefore he came down into a rock and abode in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul had heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. So, in the midst of all of this, there were some inhabitants of the area of Ziph that knew where David was and went and told Saul where David was, and even promised him that they would deliver him unto Saul. If you look at verse 24, right, and they arose and went to Ziph before Saul, but David and his men were in the wilderness of Moab, in the plain south of Jeshimon. And then Saul also and his men went to seek him. And when Saul heard where he was at, down at the very end of verse 25, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on the side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain. And David made haste to get away for fear of Saul. For Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about to take them. But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, Haste thee and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. And therefore they called the place Salah Hamalakoth. And David went up from thence and dwelt in the strongholds at Engedi. So some of the people there in Ziph come and tell Saul where he's at. Then once he finds out, Saul immediately departs for David's camps. Now, David's got 600 people constantly on the run. Probably got some lookouts, right? You know that he does. Always watching to kind of see. David has these spies, these lookouts, and he warns David. They warn David of how close Saul is. So they moved 8 miles south into the desert of Maon. That's what verse 25 was telling us there. There's a hot pursuit here of David, and they're closing in, and Saul's army is closing in on David and these 600 men and encompassing around them. And it seems like at this point, right, they're stuck, right? David's surrounded, can't get out of the area that he's in. Saul knows exactly where his location's at. He's going to move in on him and take his life and probably kill the 600 people or so that are with him. Just at that time, Saul gets word that the Philistines have invaded back at his home place, and Saul has a choice to make, right? Go and kill David, or go back and fight with the Philistines. Okay, and obviously here we see him going back and having to war with the Philistines. And then because of that happening, David then moves again from across the mountains of Judah to En-Gedi, which would be closer to the Dead Sea. Is where he's at currently, well, not currently, but as we're reading this. Okay, so lots of moving, constantly having to run, constantly going places, always in fear for his life, loading up 600 people and trying to get them around, and the nation of Israel's not a huge place, but it's a pretty big area. And he's just constantly having to kind of get to different places on the run from Saul. But it always seems like when Saul gets close, or Saul has a chance, or gets a beat on where David's at, something always happens and allows David to escape, right? Either he catches wind of it, the Philistines show up, or somebody tells him, and he's always managing to just narrowly escape away from Saul. Which again, we see God providentially kind of protecting David and not allowing Saul to follow through with his plan. What action does... Well, we haven't got there yet. So that's we see him kind of run around and camping all throughout the desert in different places. Okay? Chapter 24. Now, this is a 22-verse chapter in which a very kind of important event kind of takes place. And so we're going to read through all 22 of these verses, okay? And then we'll kind of come back in and talk about it. And the lesson has us to completely skip this. I don't know why, but it wants us to. So we're going to read these because this is an important chapter, I think. Verse 24, and it came to pass when Saul was returned from following the Philistines that it was told of him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. So Saul takes 3,000 men, takes 3,000 chosen men out of Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. So David's up in the rocks, 600 people. Saul was coming after him with an army of 3,000. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And when he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave, and went on his way. David also arose afterwards, and went out of the cave, and cried after Saul, saying, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth, and bowed himself. And David said to Saul, Wherefore hearest thou men's word, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy hurt? Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how the Lord hath delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave. And some bade me kill thee, but mine eye spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father see the skirt of thy robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe, and killed thee not. Now know thou, and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand. And I have not sinned against thee, yet thou huntest my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but my hand shall not be upon thee. And saith the proverb of the ancients, Wickedness proceedeth from the wicked, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog, and after a flea. The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see, and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand. And it came to pass, when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And when he said to David, Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. And thou hast shown this day how thou hast dealt well with me, For as much as when the Lord hath delivered me into thine hand, thou killest me not. For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good, for that thou hast done unto me this day. And now, behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord, that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, and that will not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men gat them up onto the hold. Now, famous chapter here, right? They're in the caves there, and Saul was in pursuit. Saul lays down essentially, right? Take a nap in a cave, wears out, is tired, right? And David has an opportunity here to walk up to Saul and kill the man who has been chasing him now for months, probably years at this point. And you know that the 600 people, or maybe probably the close individuals that were around David, he probably had some guys that were a little better at fighting than others that he kept around. You know they were all encouraging him to go up there and kill Saul, right? This is an opportunity. We can finally get rid of this guy. We don't have to be on the run anymore, try to kill us anymore, walk up to him and kill him. And we know the story very well. We know that David decides not to, right? Because he doesn't feel like it's his place. Saul is still the anointed king from God. Yes, David has been chosen as a replacement, but David feels that it's God's job, right, to get rid of Saul when the time is appointed. So David doesn't want to take matters into his own hands here, and he walks up and cuts off just a piece of his garment, right? And even doing that, right, was it verse 4, I think? Verse 5, and it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, even after he cut the parts of his robe off. David, he feels bad about it, right? David feels upset. He feels guilty that he walked up and did that. He shouldn't have even done that. Right now, put any of us in that situation. Right? I mean, yeah, I don't think we would want to just murder somebody, but I think at some point, after 2 or 3 spears being thrown at me and constantly running around, I think if I had the opportunity, I'd probably put a stake through his head. Right? Especially in this day and age where it probably would have been, almost for the most part, kind of celebrated. But we see David, again, acting exactly the way he's supposed to act. Right? This is David doing exactly the things he's supposed to be doing. He's being directed by God. He's very thoughtful. He doesn't make knee-jerk reactions to stuff, right? He takes his time to assess situations. He's prayerful. He's very in tune with his relationship with the Lord. And we see more evidences here of why David is the guy that's coined the man after God's own heart, right? I think anybody else in that situation probably kills Saul. I know any of the mighty men that were around him would have done that. Okay, I would say probably some of us would probably have done the exact same thing, but we see the action here when he had a golden opportunity to kill Saul. He let him live because Saul is still God's anointed king. What was the response then from Saul when this happens? How do we see Saul responding? Towards the end of the chapter there in 24. What did he say? Right? He gives David props, right, for doing not doing what he probably should have done. If the roles had been reversed, Saul would have killed David. He admits to David that he should not be pursuing him, right? He admits that it is sinful that he is pursuing David. And he kind of goes on and even says that, this is why you're going to be the king, right? Because I wouldn't have done that. Right? I would not have acted in that way. I would have absolutely killed you. I would not have been able to hold my hand. Verse 19, for if any man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good, for thou hast done me unto this day. And now behold, I know well that you are going to be king. I get it, right? You're a lot better at this than I am. And that the kingdom of Israel is going to be established in thine hand. And he asked David to promise not to kill his line, right? That's what he's asking in verse 21 and 22, right? Don't cut off the seed after me, right? Don't go through and kill all my family members because of the royalty of their line now. And of course, David promises that. So the humility that David acts with here and the opportunity to not be that way kind of dismantles at this moment the hardness in Saul's life towards David. His humility and respect that he showed didn't alter the fact that he still eventually is going to want to kill him, right? But he kind of comes to this realization of, oh, now I know why God has chosen you to replace me, right? It's kind of a very sobering moment here for Saul. Go ahead, Chad. Yeah. You can go one more time. Bring up that chart. It's just all the places. I forgot that was there. I would have showed that, but all right. So we see here then, some kind of difficult things that are going on. Saul is running after David and running from God. This is kind of the theme here of this lesson number 6. David is running from Saul and to God. The strategy here for David, right? Every time we see David in one of these situations, he's prayerful, he's thoughtful, he's always reviewing God's character, and he kind of mirrors God's character in the way that he acts. We also see the strategy here of David during difficult trials is that he is not going to take the easy way out. Right? Something Dad told me when I was little. Continues to tell me the same thing we tell our girls, tell the girls at the house a lot too. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? If it was easy, everybody would do it. Saul would have taken the easy way out here and just killed David. David, against the probably strong encouragement from the people that were on his side, wanted them to kill Saul, and he does it because he refuses to take the easy way out. Right? Life would have been much easier for David going forward right here. If you think about this, you cut the head off the snake, right? And he doesn't have to worry about the problems anymore. But David refuses to take the easy way out of his trial, out of this difficult time, and of course we know gets greatly rewarded because of it. And there's a lot of lessons here that David is showing, right? Showing patience, he's showing resolve, he's showing a reliance on God, and those people who are around him, right? Those 600 people, they witnessed this take place too, right? They saw their king, their leader, have an opportunity to do something that they thought was right. David did not think was right because he didn't think God would want it that way, and that would have been a lesson for those people as well. They probably wouldn't have understood it at first. That's crazy. Why would you not kill him? But then seeing the response of Saul, like these guys saw that too. Right? It wasn't just David and Saul having this conversation. There were other people around that witnessed this and saw this take place. So it would have greatly had an impact on the people that saw this happen. Okay. Now that jumps us into chapter 25. And chapter 25 gives us a sad report here of the passing of Samuel. So in chapter 25, Samuel has passed away, and the nation is going to kind of like take time to mourn the fact that he has passed. And Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in the house of Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man of Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goat, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. And David sent out 10 young men. And David said unto the young men, Get you up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus shall ye say to him that liveth in prosperity, Peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shears. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them all the while they were in Carmel. Okay, so we get the report, first of all, of Samuel's death in the first 3 verses. There's a mourning period for the loss of the great man of God. But it's interesting, Saul and David had just had this conversation in verse 24, in which Saul kind of realizes why David's supposed to be a king. But what is David still doing? Well, they've moved from the caves in Engedi to Maon. Why would they have to move for? Because he's still fleeing, right? So he's still on the run from Saul. So Saul, at some point, we don't ever see Saul tell David in chapter 24, hey, I'm not going to try to kill you. We don't see that, do we? We don't see that happening. Right. Smart enough not to trust him, but we never see Saul say, hey, I quit. I'm not going to try to kill you. Right? We don't see that. So David, even in the midst of this conversation with Saul, in which they kind of had this moment of peace, David and his men are still on the run. So he moves down to Maon, where they had been some months earlier, and this was an area around the area of this gentleman that we see in verse 25 named Nabal. Now, Nabal, we see, very wealthy rancher, right? Has a ton of sheep, probably a bunch of other stuff as well. He's very well-to-do, has a nice, smart, pretty wife named Abigail, and David sends men down to Nabal to request supplies. That's why they're going down there, okay? They're going down to ask for supplies, and Nabal obviously has an abundance, and that's why they go down there. Now, it's interesting here that the Jewish translation of the name Nabal, does anybody know what it means? Pastor Rob? No?
It's not good.
Fool. Nabal means fool, which is kind of interesting, right? Because especially as we see what's about to take place. This is a pretty fitting name for a rather ungrateful rancher here. That could have helped, right? Verse 6. Let's go to verse 8. Ask thy young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore, lest the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in good day. Give, I pray, unto thee whatsoever cometh to thine hand, unto thy servants, and to thy son David. And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according all those words in the name of David, and ceased. So they've asked for help. Nabal's got plenty of stuff, right? Plenty of things to help with. Wouldn't even miss any of it. Verse 10, Nabal answers David, servant, and said, Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away, every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread, and my water, and my flesh, that I have killed from my shearers, and give it unto the men, of whom I know not whence they be? So David's young men turned their way and went again, and came and told all those sayings. So Nabal's response is what? Forget it. Not so much forget it, but he kind of goes on to say, what's the first thing he says here? Who is David? Now, does Nabal know who David is? Is there anybody in Israel or all of Philistine or probably the greater area that doesn't know who David is? Especially when he goes on to say son of Jesse, right? Nabal knows good and well who David is. Hey, Nabal, it's the guy that killed Goliath, right? It's the guy that did all these things. So we see him very condescending, right? I don't know who David is. Come down here, anybody just giving my stuff away all willy-nilly. I got my stuff that I need for me and my people that are helping me. I'm not going to give anything. I don't even know who this guy is. Or I don't even know who David is. Who's David? Scoffs at the name David. So we see, obviously, not a great response here. They come back and they tell David, verse 13, And David said unto his men, Gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything as long as we were conversant with him when we were in the fields. They were a wall unto us both day and night, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now, interesting thing has kind of happened here. The men run and tell Abigail, right? Kind of that Nabal told David, no. We were up there with the sheep at night, and what were David's men doing? There's just, 13, 14, 16, sorry. And they were so what were David's men doing while they were up in the fields? They were protecting them, right? So while they're there shearing the sheep, taking care of the shepherd, or taking care of the sheep, the shepherd people, the guys, the grunt work guys, right? They see David's men. David's men are there, making sure Philistines don't show up, Saul's army doesn't show up, there's not any wolves or anything like that. So David is protecting these people, right? And they talked to them, right? And got to know them and enjoyed company with them and were conversant with them and were very helpful. And they didn't just go in and take, right? We see they didn't go in and just take stuff from the men of Nabal. They were very helpful. And these men obviously wanted to help David and his men, right? That's what they wanted to do because they felt like they should. So they run and tell Abigail, and we already have a description of Abigail. She's smart, right? She's obviously intelligent, probably a little more level-headed than her husband. So verse 18, Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves, bottles of wine, and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes and figs, and laid them on asses, and said to her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. And it was so, as she rode on the ass, that she came down by the cover of the hill, and behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. Now David had said, Surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed, all that pertaineth unto him, and he hath requited me evil for good. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave all that pertain to him by the morning light, any that pisseth against the wall. And when Abigail saw David, she hasted, lighted off the ass, and fell before David on her face, and bowed herself to the ground. So David and his men are coming down to take it. That's what they're doing, right? They tried it the nice way. They're coming down to take it. Abigail meets them on the road. David obviously is in fury here. We now see what I like to say. We see like the warring, angry side of David. Right? That's what this is. Right? We've seen him be, very humble and thoughtful, and David thought he was doing the right thing here. He's upset, obviously. He's put himself out for this guy. This guy's got plenty. He's not helping. And we see this kind of righteous anger from David here, and Abigail kind of falls down on his face and realizes what he has done. So, angered by the lack of appreciation, he threatens to kill him. Abigail apologizes for her husband's attitude, presents this generous gift that we see here, and requests that he not shed any innocent blood. That's what happens there in verses 30 down to about verse 37. And then we come back to verse 36. So Abigail has apologized, offered up this gift to David, and Abigail came back to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in the house, like a feast of a king, and Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. So wherefore she told him nothing less or more until the morning. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things. Right? So she tells him, this is funny. It's not funny, but it's funny. She tells him what happened. Wait till he sobers up. Right? Tells him what she did. I took David the stuff. Took him all these things. And Nabal, the old tightwad, when he hears this, verse 37, what happens to him? Well, he can't handle it. He can't handle that she's done this, and he dies right there on the spot, right? Because of the shock of what she has done. There, and he's laying there, and he became as a stone, it says. And it came to pass that about 10 days after that, the Lord smote Nabal, and then he died. So apparently he was in a coma, right, for whatever case may have been. He was unresponsive as a stone for 10 days, and then eventually he passes away. So And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord, that he pleadeth the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. And David sent in commune with Abigail to take her to him to wife. And when the servants of David were come to Abigail to Carmel, they spake unto her, saying, David sent us unto thee to take thee to him to wife. And she rose and bowed herself on her face to the earth, and said, Behold, let thine handmaid be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And Abigail hasted and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels of her that went after her. And she went after the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were also both of them his wives. But Saul had given Michal his daughter David's wife to Phalti the son of Laish, which was of Galem. And now we get into like a little bit of a soap opera of what's happening here, right? We know that when David killed Goliath, through all these things, eventually he ends up marrying Michal. Not at first, but eventually he ends up marrying Michal. We've seen that already. So David has his wife there in Michal. In obviously a fit of rage here, Saul has absolved that marriage. The king, I guess he could do that, and gives Michal over to the Philistines, mainly to make David mad, right? That's why he does that, right? He makes him mad, and then we see that in the aftermath of all these things happening, David now has Abigail as a wife, and David takes Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were also both of them his wives as well. So now David is starting to collect wives, people, into his circle, right, into whatever it has, and that is kind of where David is at now. Customs were different then than they are now, obviously, but we know that David is a man after God's own heart. But what I think these 5 or 6 verses show us, and I think the reason that they're here, is that it shows us a chink in the armor a little bit. Because we know eventually, like, the downfall of David is what? What's the eventual downfall of David? Bathsheba, right? That's the eventual downfall here of him. And I think it's interesting that we see this. Now, was it right or wrong that he was marrying all these women? I mean, you look at some of the Jewish customs of it. Technically, it's the king. I mean, it's a gray area. But I think the reason that we see this here is because it kind of just allows you read this, and everything we've seen through 25 chapters, like David has always made really good decisions. And I don't know. I think it's interesting that that's here and that's like that. I think it kind of shows us a chink in an armor. All right. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that. I've never had a problem that adding women to would get better. Right? I mean, that's just kind of what you would think. Kind of what David would, kind of what you would think here, but I believe this is here specifically because it kind of gives us an idea that there's David up to this point. David's been perfect for the most part. I mean, he's done everything right, other than kind of lying to the priest. But I think it's there for a chink. Okay, go ahead, Chad. All right, so next week we'll start with chapter 26, in which he respects Saul's position, and then eventually we see him showing back up with the Philistines. That'll probably be all we get to next week. Chapter 28 is when Saul goes and visits the Endor. We're going to spend some time talking about that. And eventually he defeats the Amalekites, and we finish up this lesson with the death of Jonathan and Saul. So there's a lot of stuff to say here. Okay, let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time, for this study that we have, being able to look at your word, and to see David and Saul, the continual contrast here of David following after you, Saul running away from you, Lord, and then the results of those things kind of happening, and how you just continue to provide for David and the people that were around him, to help him continue, Lord, to be an example for us to study and to learn from, Lord, and to be able to gain information and experience from, Lord, on how he handled difficult times and difficult situations, Lord. And as we continue to look through this, I pray we continue to see those things and how they can help us in our own lives. Lord, I pray for Pastor Rob in the next hours he comes to, and that you'll give us a good time, Lord, in your service, Lord, and I pray. Amen.